I still remember the morning it happened. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting its orange light on the rusted rooftops of Ngoma Town. The roosters were still crowing, and the air smelled with smoke and frying mandatsi. It should have been a day like any other, but for Aisha, it was the day her life was about to split in two. She was sitting on the front step of the small, two-room house she shared with her husband, Peter. Her wrapper was tied loosely over her chest, and she held a chipped enamel mug of sweet tea. The tea was lukewarm, but she kept sipping it, her mind wandering between hope and worry. Peter had been distant for months. The once lively man who used to bring home roasted maize and tease her until she laughed now barely looked at her. The love they had, at least the love she thought they had, was slipping away. When Peter emerged from inside, he didn't even greet her. He had his good shirt on, the one he wore when he was going somewhere important, and his shoes were shined to a mirror finish. In his hand, he carried a black leather bag Aisha had never seen before. "Peter, where are you going?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. He looked at her with the kind of eyes that had no softness left. "Aisha, I can't do this anymore. I can't stay here with you in this life. I need more." "More? More than what?" "We have each other," she said, her voice trembling. He chuckled bitterly. "Each other doesn't pay rent. Each other doesn't put me in the circles I want to be in. I'm tired of this poverty. I'm tired of you not matching my ambitions." Her breath caught. "Matching your ambitions? Peter, when you had nothing, I was here. When you couldn't pay your school fees, I sold my mother's gold earrings to help you. Now you say I'm not enough." Peter's lips curled in a cruel smile. "You're a good woman, Aisha, but a good woman isn't enough for me anymore." And just like that, he walked away. She sat there, still holding her mug of tea, staring as he disappeared down the dusty road. The neighbors pretended not to watch, but everyone saw. By evening, word had spread. The shame felt heavier than the hunger in her stomach. Days turned into weeks, and the loneliness became a shadow that followed her everywhere. She struggled to pay rent for the little house. The market women sometimes gave her vegetables on credit, but there were days she went to bed with nothing but water. Her old friends avoided her, afraid her bad luck might rub off. One afternoon, Aisha decided she couldn't stay in Ngoma any longer. She took the little money she had left, boarded a matatu to Nairobi, and promised herself she would survive, no matter what. The city was loud, crowded, and unkind. The air was thick with exhaust fumes, the sidewalks teeming with hawkers shouting prices, and the high-rise buildings seemed to look down on her with disdain. She spent nights sleeping on the floor of a distant cousin's one-room apartment in Ko. She sold second-hand clothes in Jacamba Market, waking up at 4 a.m. to buy bales and shouting her throat hoarse to get customers. It was during one of those early mornings at the market that she met Mama Grace, an older woman with sharp eyes and a booming laugh. Mama Grace ran a small import business and was known for spotting hard-working people. She noticed Aisha's determination, her way of treating even the poorest customers with respect. One day, she pulled Aisha aside. "You have fire in you, girl," Mama Grace said, chewing on a toothpick. "Come work for me. I'll teach you how to run a business." Aisha didn't hesitate. She started by running errands, managing deliveries, and keeping accounts. She learned fast how to negotiate prices, how to spot quality goods, how to deal with customs officers without being cheated. Months passed, and Mama Grace began trusting her with bigger responsibilities. One evening, as they sat counting the day's earnings, Mama Grace said, "Aisha, I've seen many people come and go. You're different. I'm getting old, and my children are all in America. I want someone to keep this business alive. I want that person to be you." It felt like a dream. Aisha worked even harder. She reinvested every shilling, expanded into electronics, and opened a stall in Westlands. She dressed in fine Kaiten's dresses, learned to speak with the confidence of someone who belonged in boardrooms, and slowly built a name in the Nairobi business circles. Then, one crisp July morning, while walking through a car showroom to finalize a delivery deal, she saw it, a sleek black Lamborghini Huracan. Its curves glistened under the showroom lights, and the smell of new leather filled the air. "How much?" she asked the salesman, almost as a joke. 30 million shillings, he replied. She smiled. I'll take it. When she drove that car out of the showroom, heads turned everywhere she went. The purr of the engine was like a song of triumph. But she wasn't thinking about random strangers staring. She was thinking about Ngoma. 1 year to the day after Peter had abandoned her, she returned. The sun was again rising, casting the same orange light on the same rusty rooftops. The roads were still dusty. The goats still wandered lazily, and the women were still bent over their morning chores. But this time, the sound that broke the morning air wasn't a rooster. It was a deep, throaty growl of a Lamborghini engine. The children ran after the car, shouting and laughing. Old men straightened their backs to see better. Peter was sitting outside the local shop, playing draft with his friends. He looked up when he heard the noise, his brow furrowing. When the car rolled to a stop right in front of him, and the driver's door swung up like a bird's wing, his jaw went slack. Aisha stepped out, the heels of her shoes clicking against the tarmac. Her dress was tailored perfectly, hugging her figure, and a delicate gold chain glimmered at her throat. She took off her sunglasses slowly, letting him see her eyes. "Peter," she said, her voice steady. "You look the same." He swallowed hard. "Aisha, I..." She raised a hand. "No, you don't get to talk. 1 year ago, you said I wasn't enough. Look at me now. And look at you." The crowd that had gathered murmured, some nodding in satisfaction, others simply stunned. She didn't wait for his reply. She slipped her sunglasses back on, got into the Lamborghini, and the engine roared to life. As she drove away, she felt a mix of emotions, vindication, sadness, a hint of pity. But most of all, she felt free. She had built herself in the ashes he left her in, and now she knew she could survive anything. Ngoma would remember this day for years. The day the poor, abandoned wife returned. Not begging, not angry, but victorious. And Peter? He would spend many nights staring at the road, wondering how he let gold slip through his fingers. The dust had barely settled after the Lamborghini disappeared down Ngoma's main road when the murmurs began. The old men outside the shop whispered to each other, shaking their heads. The women in the roadside stalls leaned toward each other with knowing smiles. The children were still chasing the last whiff of exhaust like it was magic smoke. Peter remained seated, his hand frozen above the draft board, the small bottle cap he was about to place down trembling between his fingers. That night, Peter barely ate. His mind was not on the plate of ugali, and Sukuma, his sister, had prepared. He kept seeing Aisha's face, calm, unbothered, more beautiful than he remembered. The image of her stepping out of that Lamborghini, gold catching the sunlight, burned into his brain. He lay in bed staring at the tin roof, hearing the rain tap against it. The sound reminded him of the first rainy season they had spent together as husband and wife. He could still see her laughing as they chased leaking drops with basins, the smell of wet earth mixing with the scent of her coconut hair oil. But those memories soured quickly. Back then, Peter had a good job as a boda rider, and Aisha sold vegetables in the market. They didn't have much, but there was always food on the table. Then the city friends came, men in shiny suits who called him brother, and spoke of easy money in Nairobi. They told him a man like him deserved better than a market woman and a rapper, that he should be chasing real women who could open doors to wealth. At first, he ignored them, but their words found cracks in his pride. It didn't help that Aisha's small business was struggling. Some days, she came home with just a few coins, and the argument started. "Peter, life is hard now, but we'll get better," she would say, resting a hand on his arm. "You don't know what I want, Aisha," he would snap. "You're satisfied with too little." The truth was, Peter had started seeing another woman in the city. Her name was Trina, a woman with high heels, perfume that lingered, and laughter that made him feel rich even when his pocket was empty. She was everything Aisha wasn't, or so he thought then. That's why, 1 year ago, he had left. He didn't know then that Trina would tire of him in a few months, that the city would chew him up and spit him out. Now, after seeing Aisha again, the shame was heavier than any poverty. The next day, Peter wandered to the small bar at the edge of Ngoma. The owner, a plump woman named Mama and Jerry, poured him a beer and leaned on the counter. "I hear your wife came back," she said, her eyes sharp. "She's not my wife anymore," Peter muttered. Mama and Jerry chuckled. Maybe not on paper, but in everyone's memory, she still is. And now she's richer than the governor. Peter didn't reply. He sipped his beer slowly, thinking about the path his life had taken. Meanwhile, in Nairobi, Aisha sat in her Westland's office, going over invoices. She had no time for Peter's regrets. But that night, lying in her king-size bed, she thought of Ngoma, not with bitterness, but with a strange ache. She had built an empire, but part of her still remembered the days she shared a single plate of food with Peter, laughing over nothing. The following weekend, Aisha received a call from Mama Grace. "Child, I know what you did," Mama Grace said with a smile in her voice. "Driving that machine into Ngoma? Eesh, you gave those villagers something to talk about for the next 10 years. Aisha laughed. "It wasn't planned. I just wanted him to see me." Mama Grace's tone softened. "Sometimes revenge feels sweet, but don't let it keep you from living." Aisha didn't answer. Deep inside, she knew Mama Grace was right. 2 weeks later, Ngoma held its annual harvest festival. It was a time when everyone, rich or poor, came together to eat, dance, and show off new clothes. Aisha hadn't attended in years, but this time she felt a pull. When she arrived, heads turned again. She didn't bring the Lamborghini. Instead, she wore a stunning Ankara gown, her hair in a high crown of braids. The children ran to greet her, and old women hugged her like a daughter returned from war. Peter saw her across the field. He hesitated, then walked toward her. "Aisha," he began, I was wrong." She looked at him quietly. "I know. I thought I needed more, but you were more than enough. I just didn't see it." His voice cracked. Aisha's eyes softened, but her words were firm. "Peter, we can't go back. You left me in the cold, and I had to teach myself to walk in the fire. Now I'm not the woman you knew." Peter swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I'm happy you made it, even if I'm not part of your life anymore." For the first time in a long while, Aisha smiled, not the victorious smile from the Lamborghini day, but a warmer one. "Take care of yourself, Peter." She turned and walked away, her gown swaying, the festival lights casting a golden glow on her skin. As she drove back to Nairobi that night, the road stretched ahead like a promise. She no longer needed revenge to feel whole. She had won the greater battle, becoming someone she was proud to be. In Ngoma, Peter watched the taillights fade into the night, realizing that her success was not just a slap to his pride. It was a mirror to his mistakes. The early morning sun cast long golden rays across the dusty, narrow streets of Ngoma village, a small town nestled between sprawling maize fields and dense acacia trees. The air smelled of freshly turned earth and simmering ugali pots, blending with the distant crowing of roosters. Aisha sat quietly on the worn wooden doorstep of her small two-room house, her eyes tracing the horizon where the sun was awakening the world. She wore a faded wrapper tied loosely around her slim frame, and her bare feet rested on the cracked earthen floor. Her hands, rough from days of work at the market, trembled slightly as she clutched a chipped enamel mug filled with lukewarm tea. Her heart was heavy, for she knew today was not like any other. Peter, her husband, was inside preparing to leave. She could hear the faint rustling of his clothes as he dressed. He was wearing the shirt she had bought him last year, the one he only wore on special occasions. The shirt was iron crisp and neat, contrasting the dirt of their humble home. When he finally stepped outside, Aisha's breath hitched. His eyes, once soft and full of dreams, now held a coldness she barely recognized. "Aisha," he said curtly without a greeting. "I'm leaving." "Leaving?" Her voice cracked, disbelief mingling with fear. "Where will you go?" "To Nairobi," he replied, voice hard. "I need a better life. I can't stay here with you in this poverty." Her hands clenched around the mug. "But we promised to face everything together." Peter shook his head. "I want more. You're not the woman I married anymore." Tears blurred her vision. "I'm the same Aisha. I have never stopped loving you." He looked away and started walking down the dirt road, his footsteps kicking up dust behind him. As he disappeared from sight, Aisha sat frozen, a quiet storm raging inside her. The neighbors averted their eyes, the air heavy with whispered judgments. The days that followed were a blur of loneliness and desperation. Aisha struggled to pay rent, to feed herself, to keep the fragile thread of hope alive. The market was harsh, and customers were scarce. Sometimes she ate just a handful of ugali and drank water, swallowing the ache in her stomach. One evening, as she watched the sunset bleed into the horizon, she made a decision. She would leave Ngoma. She would go to Nairobi and fight for a life worth living, for herself and for the dreams Peter had abandoned. The city was a cacophony of sounds and colors unlike anything Aisha had ever known. Nairobi's streets were crowded, buzzing with matatas honking, vendors shouting, and the distant wail of sirens. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the sidewalks cracked but teeming with life. Her first nights were cold and lonely. She shared a cramped room with distant relatives in Ko, waking before dawn to scour the markets for second-hand clothes she could sell. The days were long and grueling, filled with endless bargaining and hard labor. But Aisha had fire in her soul. Every shilling she earned, she saved. Every insult she faced, she swallowed and learned from. It was at the Jacamba market that she met Mama Grace, an older woman with piercing eyes and a booming laugh. Mama Grace saw something special in Aisha, a resilience, a spark of ambition that refused to die. "Come work for me," Mama Grace said one day, pulling Aisha aside. "I'll teach you how to run a business." Aisha accepted, and under Mama Grace's guidance, she learned the art of negotiation, the importance of trust, and the power of persistence. Months passed, and Aisha's skills grew. She opened a stall in Westlands, expanded her inventory, and dressed in fine chitinge dresses that made her stand out. Her confidence blossomed, and with it, her dreams. One morning, she walked into a luxury car showroom and saw a black Lamborghini gleaming under the showroom lights. The price tag was staggering, but Aisha felt a surge of determination. "I'll take it," she told the stunned salesman. The day Aisha returned to Ngoma, the entire village buzzed with excitement. The sound of the Lamborghini's engine was unlike anything the dusty streets had ever heard. Children ran alongside the sleek black machine, their eyes wide with wonder. Peter sat outside the small shop, playing draft with friends. When the car stopped in front of him and Aisha stepped out, radiant and confident, he was speechless. She looked at him with steady eyes. "Peter," she said, "you said I wasn't enough. Look at me now." Without waiting for a reply, she climbed back into the car and drove away, leaving behind a stunned village and a man haunted by regret. That night, Peter sat alone in a dimly lit bar, the weight of his mistakes heavy on his heart. Memories flooded him. The laughter he shared with Aisha, the promises made under starlit skies, and the city friends who whispered lies that tore them apart. Meanwhile, Aisha, back in Nairobi, reflected on her journey. She realized that success was not just about wealth or revenge. It was about rising from the ashes with grace and strength. The Harvest Festival in Ngoma brought them face to face again. This time, Peter admitted his mistakes, but Aisha knew they could never return to the past. She walked away, a woman transformed. The sun was just rising over the dusty plains of Ngoma village, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. The air smelled of dry earth and cooking fires, mingling with a faint cry of roosters greeting the new day. In a small compound bordered by cracked mud walls, Aisha sat on the doorstep of her modest home. Her eyes, deep and dark, reflected a sadness that seemed heavier than her thin frame. Her wrapper, once bright and colorful, had faded and was frayed at the edges. She held a chipped enamel mug in her hands, its contents lukewarm tea. Inside, her husband Peter was hurriedly packing a small worn-out bag. The weight in the room was palpable, heavier than the thick dust that settled everywhere. Peter had once been a man full of dreams and laughter, but now he moved with a cold attachment that cut through Aisha's heart. "Aisha," he said without looking at her, voice low and hard, "I'm leaving." She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Leaving? But why? What will happen to us?" Peter avoided her gaze. "I need a better life, and I can't find it here. You don't understand what I want. Her hands trembled as she held her mug tighter. "I have always stood by you, through everything." He sighed bitterly. "You're not enough anymore. I want more. I deserve more." Without another word, he walked out the door and into the dusty street. The neighbors turned away, whispering behind cupped hands. Days passed. The loneliness settled like dust on Aisha's soul. At the market, she sold vegetables and fruits, but the earnings barely filled her belly. She ate one meal a day, sometimes just a small piece of maize bread. The nights were cold, and her dreams were haunted by the emptiness left by Peter's footsteps fading away. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky purple, Aisha made a decision. She would leave Ngoma. She would go to Nairobi, the sprawling city pulsing with noise, opportunity, and danger. She would find a way to survive, to rise. The journey to Nairobi was a jolt to her senses. The city roared with life. Matetas honking in a chaotic chorus, hawkers shouting their wares, and the smell of exhaust fumes and fried street food thick in the air. She found a tiny room in Keol, cramped and dusty, where she slept on a thin mattress with dreams bigger than the walls around her. Aisha found work selling secondhand clothes at the Jacamba market. The competition was fierce, and the days were long. Her voice grew hoarse from calling out prices and bargaining fiercely with customers. Some days she sold enough to pay rent and buy food. Other days she went hungry, hiding her hunger behind a forced smile. One day, Mama Grace, a formidable woman who owned a successful import business, noticed Aisha's grit and determination. "You have fire, girl," Mama Grace said with a toothpick clenched between her teeth. "Come work for me. I'll teach you how to make your own way." Under Mama Grace's mentorship, Aisha learned the business ropes, how to negotiate with suppliers, keep accounts, and manage deliveries. She grew confident and savvy. Within months, she saved enough to rent a small stall in Westlands, where she sold imported goods. Her transformation was not just in business. She began dressing in vibrant chitin dresses that hugged her figure and styled her hair in intricate braids that turned heads. The poor girl from Ngoma was becoming a woman of the city, strong, independent, and unafraid. One afternoon, walking past a luxury car showroom, Aisha's eyes landed on a sleek black Lamborghini. The sharp lines and gleaming paint spoke of power and success she never thought possible. "How much?" she asked, almost laughing. 30 million shillings, the salesman replied, eyebrows raised. Aisha smiled. "I'll take it." The purchase shocked everyone who knew her. The poor market woman had become a woman who owned a Lamborghini, an impossible dream come true. Exactly 1 year after Peter's departure, Aisha returned to Ngoma. The village looked the same, dusty roads, goats wandering, and women pounding maize outside their homes. But the sound that broke the morning stillness was different. The deep growl of a powerful engine. The Lamborghini rolled to a stop in front of a small shop, where Peter and his friend sat. His jaw dropped as Aisha stepped out, her dress tailored and elegant, her gold jewelry sparkling in the sunlight. "Peter," she said calmly, "you said I wasn't enough. Look at me now." He struggled for words, his eyes wide with shock and shame. Without waiting for a reply, Aisha slid into the driver's seat and drove away, the engine's roar echoing through the village like a victory anthem. Peter's nights grew darker and lonelier. The promises he had chased turned to dust. Friends from the city turned their backs, and his pride was shattered. The man who once sought more found himself with less than he had when he left. Aisha in Nairobi realized that true success was more than wealth. It was the strength to survive, the courage to rise after falling, and the grace to forgive herself. The annual harvest festival in Ngoma brought Aisha and Peter face to face once more. Peter apologized, but Aisha knew some things could not be undone. She walked away with her head held high, free and whole. The journey from poverty to power was never easy. It was filled with heartache, betrayal, and long nights spent wondering if she could go on. But Aisha's story was one of hope. Hope that even when abandoned, even when broken, a woman could rebuild herself stronger than before.